My 18th birthday wasn't a celebration. There was no cake, no candles flickering in the dark, no chorus of off-key voices singing words that were supposed to mean something. There was just a cardboard box and a handshake from a man who had watched too many kids walk out this door to pretend it meant anything more than paperwork. The box held everything I owned. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans worn thin at the knees, underwear that had been washed so many times the elastic barely held, a toothbrush, a paperback novel with a cracked spine that I'd read 11 times, and a single photograph. The photograph was of a woman I barely remembered. Dark hair, tired eyes, a smile that looked like it hurt. My mother, Jessica. She'd been gone 12 years. Long enough that her face in my memory had been replaced by this faded image, the edges soft from being held too many times by hands that wanted to remember. The handshake came from Director Paulson. He was 50-something, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had learned not to get attached. The Portland Youth Residence had been my home for the last 3 years. Before that, it was the Henderson House. Before that, the Morrison Group home. Before that, a blur of bedrooms shared with girls whose names I'd forced myself to forget because remembering hurt too much when they disappeared. Paulson's hand was dry and firm, professional, the grip of a man who had done this hundreds of times. He looked at me with eyes that tried to be kind but couldn't quite hide the relief. Another file closed. Another bed open for the next kid aging out of a system that was never designed to care, only to contain. "The world is yours, Claire," he said. His voice carried that practiced warmth that social workers learn in training, the kind that sounds like comfort but feels like a warning. He didn't smile when he said it. He knew better. The world wasn't mine. The world was a cold grid of concrete and indifference, and I was being pushed out into it with $73 in my pocket and a box that weighed almost nothing. I walked out of the residence at 8 in the morning. February in Portland meant gray skies and a wind that cut through my jacket like it wasn't even there. The air smelled like rain and exhaust. The sidewalk was cracked, weeds pushing through the gaps like they were trying to escape something underground. I stood there for a long minute, the box tucked under one arm, and I tried to figure out which direction to go. The plan, if you could call it that, was simple. Walk to the bus station, take the number 12 to the shelter on Morrison Street, sleep there tonight. Tomorrow start looking for work. Dishwashing maybe, cleaning hotel rooms. Something that paid cash and didn't ask too many questions. Save enough for a security deposit on a room somewhere. A place with a door that locked. A place that was mine. It wasn't a dream. It was arithmetic, cold and exact. The calculation of what it took not to die on the street. I had walked maybe 10 blocks when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a cheap prepaid thing I bought myself with money from washing dishes at a diner near the residence. The screen was already spiderwebbed with cracks from the time I'd dropped it on the sidewalk. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers were usually mistakes or scams. People trying to sell me things I couldn't afford or trick me into giving up information I didn't have. But something made me stop. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the fact that I had nowhere to be and nothing to lose. I pressed the green button and held the phone to my ear. "Hello," my voice came out hoarse, like I hadn't used it in days. The voice on the other end was male, older, dry as dust and twice as tired. "Am I speaking with Claire Brennan?" I felt my stomach drop. Nobody called me by my full name unless it was official, unless it was bad news. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Arthur Graves. I'm an attorney. I've been trying to reach you. I'm the executor of your grandmother's estate." I stopped walking. The noise of the city seemed to fade into a dull roar behind me. A river of people flowed around me on the sidewalk, but I felt like I was standing still while the world kept moving. "My grandmother," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth. "I don't have a grandmother." There was a pause on the other end, a sigh that sounded like a man who had heard every possible response to bad news and had stopped being surprised by any of them. Her name was Rose Brennan. She passed away 4 months ago. I'm afraid it took some time to locate you. The state's records aren't exactly a model of efficiency. He said it like my entire childhood of being shuffled between foster homes was a minor clerical inconvenience, a filing error, a misplaced form. I'm sorry, I said. The response was automatic, learned behavior. I wasn't sorry. How could I be sorry for the death of a stranger? I don't understand. What estate? She left you something, Miss Brennan, her property. It's not a straightforward inheritance. There are some complications. Could you come to my office? We need to discuss this in person. My mind felt like it was trying to catch up with words that didn't make sense. Property, inheritance, grandmother. These were words from a different world. A world where people had families and histories and things that got passed down. They weren't words that belonged to someone like me. Where are you? I asked. He gave me an address downtown, one of those tall glass buildings that reflected the gray sky like a mirror. A place I'd walked past 100 times but never thought I'd go inside. The kind of place where people wore suits and carried briefcases and had lives that made sense. I can be there in an hour, I said. My heart was pounding slow and heavy against my ribs. Very good, he said, and the line went dead. I stood there holding the phone, the screen dark, the cracked glass catching the weak morning light. A grandmother. I had a grandmother, had, past tense. A woman I'd never met who had left me something I didn't understand. I found a public restroom in a coffee shop. The kind barista gave me the code without making me buy anything. I locked the door and looked at myself in the mirror. Pale skin, dark circles under my eyes, hair that needed washing. I looked like what I was, a kid with nothing trying to pass for someone who belonged. I washed my face with cold water, tried to smooth my hair down, straightened my jacket. It didn't help much, but it was all I had. I hid my cardboard box behind a dumpster in the alley next to the coffee shop, wedged it between the brick wall and a pile of flattened boxes that smelled like rotting vegetables. It wasn't safe, but nothing was safe. I said a silent prayer to nobody in particular that it would still be there when I came back. The bus ride downtown cost me $2.40. I watched the meter on the front of the bus count down my remaining balance. $70.60 left. The bus was half empty. A man in a rumpled suit sleeping with his head against the window. An old woman with a shopping cart full of bags. A teenage boy with headphones on, nodding to music I couldn't hear. All of us going somewhere, none of us looking at each other. The building was on 5th Avenue. 27 floors of glass and steel, the kind of architecture that was designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. I walked through the revolving door into a lobby that smelled like expensive floor polish and air conditioning. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor. The elevator was silent and smooth. My ears popped as it climbed. 27 floors in what felt like seconds. The doors opened onto a hallway with thick carpet that swallowed sound. A sign on the wall pointed me to Suite 2701, Graves and Associates, attorneys at law. The reception area was all chrome and leather and hushed quiet. A woman sat behind a desk, her hair pulled back in a way that looked painful, her makeup perfect. She looked up from her computer as I walked in. Her eyes flicked over my worn jeans, my frayed jacket, my scuffed shoes. Her smile tightened at the edges, a barely perceptible shift that I'd learned to recognize years ago. Judgment wrapped in politeness. "Can I help you?" she said. Her voice was pleasant, professional, empty. "I'm here to see Mr. Graves. My name is Claire Brennan." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or pity. She pressed a button on her phone. "Mr. Graves, Claire Brennan is here to see you." A moment later, a door opened and a man appeared. He was older than I'd imagined from his voice on the phone. Maybe 60, maybe older, thinning gray hair, glasses with thick black frames, a suit that had seen better days, the kind of rumpled that came from a man who spent more time reading than ironing. He extended a hand. "Miss Brennan, thank you for coming." His handshake was dry, his grip neither too firm nor too soft. The handshake of a man who had learned to reveal nothing. He led me into his office. It was smaller than I expected, cluttered, stacks of paper on every surface, law books lining the walls, their spines cracked from use. A single window looked out over the gray expanse of the city, the buildings fading into mist. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. I sat down, my hands clasped in my lap to keep them from shaking. The leather was cold through my jeans. "Coffee, water?" he asked. "No, thank you." He sat down and folded his hands on the desk. For a long moment he just looked at me, not unkindly, not with pity, just looked, the way you might look at a problem you're trying to solve. "As I said on the phone, your grandmother Rose Brennan passed away 4 months ago. I was her attorney for the last few years of her life. She named you as her sole heir." He slid a manila folder across the desk. My name was written on the tab in neat black ink. Claire Brennan. Seeing it there, official and real, made something twist in my chest. "She left you her property," he continued. "A little over 50 acres in Hood River County. It's about an hour and a half from here. Maybe 2 hours by bus." 50 acres. The number was meaningless. I couldn't picture it. The biggest space I'd ever known was the concrete yard behind the residence. Maybe half an acre, surrounded by chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. "What kind of property?" I asked. "It was a cherry orchard," he said. "I believe it's been inactive for some time. There's a farmhouse, a barn, the basics." He paused, took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. This was the part he didn't want to say. I could see it in the way he avoided my eyes. "Now for the complications," he said. "Your grandmother took out a significant loan against the property several years ago. Medical expenses mostly. That loan is now in default. The bank is preparing to foreclose. On top of that, there are several years of back taxes owed to the county." The small flicker of hope that had started in my chest went out like a candle in the wind. Of course there was a catch. The world didn't give you things for free. It gave you problems disguised as gifts. "So I've inherited a debt," I said. The words tasted like ash. "In a manner of speaking, yes. The total amount owed to the bank and the county is roughly $178,000. I almost laughed. $178,000. I had $70.60. "However," he continued, holding up a hand, "there is another option. A development company called Horizon Land Group has been trying to acquire land in that area for a large residential project. They made an offer on your grandmother's property before she passed. A standing offer. They're prepared to pay $225,000 for the land as is." He let that sink in. The math was simple, even for someone like me who'd spent more time worrying about survival than studying algebra. 225 minus 178, $47,000. They would pay off the bank and the county directly, he explained. The remainder, approximately $47,000, would be yours, free and clear. $47,000. It was more money than I'd ever imagined holding. It was a security deposit and first month's rent on a real apartment. It was a used car. It was community college tuition. It was food for a year. It was the possibility of a life that didn't involve sleeping in shelters and washing dishes for minimum wage. It was everything I'd been trying to calculate how to build. handed to me on a silver platter. "You just have to sign the papers," he said, tapping the folder. "Horizon is eager to close. We could have the funds in your account within a week." A week, in a week, I could be safe. I could have a door that locked and a bed that was mine and enough money to figure out what came next. "Why didn't my grandmother sell to them?" I asked. The question hung in the air. Graves sighed, put his glasses back on. "She was stubborn," he said. "She had an attachment to the place. She seemed to believe the offer was too low, that they were trying to cheat her. Frankly, Miss Brennan, given the state of the property and the debt against it, the offer is more than fair. It's generous." He leaned forward. His eyes were tired, but there was something else there. Something that might have been kindness, or might have been the memory of kindness from a long time ago. "Look, Claire, may I call you Claire?" I nodded. "You're 18 years old with nothing. No family, no resources, no safety net. This is a gift. This is your way out. Take the money, start your life. Don't make the same mistake your grandmother made." He used my first name deliberately. A nudge, an appeal, the voice of reason telling me to be smart. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to say yes, to sign the papers and take the money and run, to grab this impossible stroke of luck and not look back. But I thought about the photograph in my box, the faded image of my mother, and I thought about the grandmother I never knew, a stubborn old woman who refused to let go of a piece of land, a woman who, for some reason I didn't understand, had left it to a granddaughter she'd never even met. "I want to see it," I said. The words came out before I could stop them, before the rational part of my brain could override the part that needed to understand why. Graves blinked, surprised. "See it? Why, it's a derelict farm, Miss Brennan. There's nothing there for you." "She left it to me," I said. My voice was quiet but firm. "I want to see it before I decide." He stared at me for a long time. I think he was trying to decide if I was stubborn or stupid. Maybe both. Maybe he was remembering another stubborn woman who had sat in a chair across from his desk and refused to do the smart thing. Finally, he nodded slowly. "As you wish, it's your right." He scribbled an address on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a large old-fashioned iron key, heavy, the kind that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. "This is the address. The bus from the terminal leaves twice a day. This key is for the front door of the house." He paused, his expression softened just a fraction. "I'd advise you not to stay long. The utilities have been off for months. No heat, no running water. It's February, Claire, you'll freeze." I took the key and the piece of paper. The key was cold in my hand, solid, real. It felt ancient, like it had unlocked 100 doors before this one. "Call me when you've made your decision," Graves said, "but don't take too long. The bank won't wait forever, and Horizon's offer won't be on the table indefinitely. These companies move on when they don't get what they want." I stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Graves." He stood too. For a moment he looked like he wanted to say something else, some final piece of advice or warning, but he just nodded. "Good luck, Miss Brennan." I walked out of the office, past the receptionist with her tight smile, back into the silent elevator. As the doors closed, I looked at my reflection in the polished steel. I looked pale, scared, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't just being pushed by the current. I was choosing to swim in a direction of my own. I didn't know if I was swimming toward a new life, or just toward a different kind of drowning. The bus station was a symphony of human misery. People sleeping on benches, their possessions clutched tight. A woman crying into a phone, her voice raw. A man staring at the departures board like it held answers to questions he'd forgotten how to ask. The fluorescent lights were too bright, humming with a frequency that made my teeth ache. I bought a one-way ticket to Hood River, $12. I had 58.60 left. The next bus didn't leave for 2 hours, so I sat on a bench near the restroom and waited. I went back to the alley and found my box still there, wedged behind the dumpster where I'd left it. Small miracles. The bus was half empty. Mostly older folks, their faces lined with the quiet resignation of rural life. They looked at me with mild curiosity. A city kid, out of place. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of the window and watched the world change. Portland dissolved slowly. The tall buildings gave way to sprawling suburbs, houses packed tight like teeth. Then strip malls. Then scattered homes with space between them. Then open country. The gray concrete bled into browns and greens, fields, forests. The sky seemed to get bigger, wider, like someone had lifted a lid I didn't know was there. Skeletal trees flashed past the window, their bare branches reaching toward the gray sky like fingers trying to grab hold of something they'd lost. The Columbia River appeared, wide and dark, flowing west toward the ocean. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks white with snow. For 18 years, my world had been a series of rooms. Bedrooms shared with 3 other girls who cycled in and out like seasons. Cafeterias with long tables and the smell of institutional food. Classrooms with fluorescent lights and teachers who tried to care, but had too many kids to remember names. Social workers' offices with plastic chairs and forms to sign. Courtrooms where judges decided my life in 10-minute hearings. Always walls, always boundaries defined by someone else. Now, looking out the window at the vast emptiness, I felt something close to terror. I didn't belong to the city I just left. And I certainly didn't belong here, in this landscape of fields and forests and silence. I was an alien, dropped into a foreign world. I clutched the iron key in my pocket. It was the only thing that felt real, a key to a house. My house. The thought was absurd. It wasn't a house. It was a liability. It wasn't a home. It was a problem to be solved. Sell, the word echoed in my mind like a mantra. Take the money. Start over. Be smart. It was the logical choice. The only choice. So why was I on this bus? Why was I spending $12 precious to go see a place that everyone agreed was worthless? Because it was mine. In a life where I had never owned anything, never been given anything that wasn't a hand-me-down or a state-issued necessity, this one broken thing belonged to me. A stubborn old woman I'd never met had reached across time and death and abandonment to hand me a key. I had to know why. The bus wheezed to a stop at what looked like the middle of nowhere. Hood River, the driver called out without turning around. I was the only one who got off. The town, if you could call it that, was small. A main street with maybe 20 buildings, a grocery store, a hardware store, a diner with a faded sign that just said eat, a post office, a gas station, that was it. The air was different here, clean, sharp, cold. It smelled like earth and pine trees and wood smoke from chimneys I couldn't see. There were no sirens, no roar of traffic, no voices yelling, just the sigh of wind in the trees and the distant sound of the river. I went into the grocery store. An old man behind the counter looked up from his newspaper. The store smelled like coffee and floor wax. "Help you?" he asked. "I'm looking for this address," I said, showing him the paper Graves had given me. He squinted at it. "Brennan Place, sure, about 3 miles west on River Road, you family." "Granddaughter," I said. The word felt strange on my tongue. Foreign. He looked at me for a long moment. "Sorry about Rose. She was good people, stubborn as a mule but good." "You knew her," I said. It wasn't a question. "Everyone knows everyone out here. You need a ride. It's a long walk." "I can walk," I said. I needed the time, needed to delay the moment when I'd actually arrive, when I'd see whatever it was that Rose had left me. I bought a bottle of water and a bag of peanuts with some of my remaining cash. Lunch. Then I started walking. River Road was 2 lanes of cracked asphalt. No sidewalk. Fields stretched out on either side, brown and fallow under the February sky. I passed a few houses set far back from the road, their mailboxes leaning at odd angles. A dog barked from somewhere I couldn't see. Otherwise, it was silent. 3 miles felt like 10. My box grew heavier with every step. My shoulders ached. The wind was relentless, cutting through my jacket like it wasn't there. I thought about turning back, about catching the next bus to Portland, about calling Graves and telling him to prepare the papers. I could be back in the city by nightfall. This whole strange detour could be over. But I kept walking. And then I saw it. A break in the trees, a dirt lane rutted and overgrown with weeds, a gate rusted and hanging crooked from a single hinge, and nailed to a wooden post, a weathered sign. Most of the paint was gone, but I could just make out the faint letters. Brennan Cherry Orchard. This was it. I turned onto the lane. The dirt was soft under my feet, still damp from recent rain. On either side, rows of trees stretched away into the distance. Cherry trees. Their branches were bare and tangled, a chaotic web of black against the gray sky. They looked dead, abandoned, a battlefield after the war was over. I followed the lane for what felt like 100 yards, and then the house came into view. It was a simple 2-story farmhouse, white or it had been once. Now the paint was weathered to a dull gray, peeling in long strips. The porch sagged in the middle, held up by what looked like sheer stubbornness. The windows were dark, empty eyes staring out at nothing. A brick chimney rose crookedly from the roof, reaching toward the sky like it was trying to escape. It wasn't just neglected. It looked wounded, like something that had been left to die alone. I stopped in the middle of the lane and just stared. This was my inheritance, a ghost of a house on a dying piece of land. Graves was right. There was nothing here for me, nothing but debt and decay. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and sharp. Anger at the grandmother I'd never known. Why leave me this? This monument to failure. Was it a joke? A cruel final prank on the granddaughter she'd never bothered to know? I walked up the 3 steps to the porch. One of them groaned under my weight, the wood soft with rot. The front door was faded blue, the paint blistered and peeling. The keyhole was dark with rust. I took the iron key from my pocket. My hand was shaking. I slid the key into the lock. It resisted, gritty with rust and time. I had to jiggle it, push it, force it. For a second I thought it wouldn't work, that the lock was as dead as everything else here. Then with a loud grating clunk, the mechanism turned. The sound echoed in the profound silence. I took a deep breath, turned the knob, pushed the door open. The air that flowed out was cold and musty, thick with the smell of dust and disuse and something else. Something faintly sweet, like dried flowers and old paper. It was the smell of a life sealed up and left to wait. I stepped across the threshold, out of the wind, and into the quiet dark of the house. The door swung shut behind me with a soft click. And I was alone. For a long moment, I didn't move. I let my eyes adjust to the gloom. I was standing in a small entryway that opened into a larger living room. Everything was covered in a thick, uniform layer of dust, a gray shroud that softened every edge and muted every color. Furniture huddled under white sheets. Their shapes were strange, anonymous, like sleeping animals under snow. A staircase rose to the 2nd floor, its banister thick with cobwebs that swayed in the draft from the door. Pale sunlight filtered through the dirty windows, striping the dusty floor with bars of weak light. It was utterly silent, not the muffled silence of the city, where sound was always there if you listened close enough. This was a deep, profound quiet, the silence of abandonment. I could hear my own heartbeat, the rush of blood in my ears. I set my cardboard box down on the floor. The sound was shockingly loud in the stillness. I took a tentative step into the living room, pulled the sheet off the nearest shape. It was a sofa, upholstered in faded floral fabric. I ran my hand over it, leaving a clean streak in the dust. I moved through the room, pulling off sheets one by one. An armchair with the right arm worn smooth. A coffee table with a stack of old magazines, their pages yellowed. A fireplace, the hearth swept clean. Everything was neat, tidy, just dusty. It hadn't been ransacked. It hadn't been left in a hurry. It had been prepared, put to sleep, like someone had known they weren't coming back and had wanted to leave things ready for whoever came next. I went into the kitchen. The linoleum was cracked, its yellow pattern faded. The appliances were ancient. A gas stove from the 70s. A refrigerator with a handle that looked like it belonged in a museum. A calendar hung on the wall, still turned to August of the previous year. A single coffee cup sat in the drying rack by the sink. It felt like the person who lived here had just stepped out for a moment and never come back. I opened the refrigerator. It was empty and clean, the shelves wiped down. The power had been off for months, but there was no smell of rot. She'd cleaned it out before she left. Wherever Rose had gone to die, she'd known she wasn't coming back. The realization sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cold. This wasn't the act of someone giving up. This was deliberate, orderly. The preparation of someone who knew the end was coming and wanted to leave things in order. I went back to the living room, and that's when I saw it. On the mantelpiece above the fireplace, propped against a dusty vase, was a single envelope, thick, heavy, and my name was written on it in shaky but elegant handwriting. Claire. Not Claire Brennan, just Claire. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked over, my feet silent on the dusty floorboards, picked up the envelope. It was heavier than I expected. I broke the seal with my thumb and pulled out a thick sheaf of folded papers. It was a letter. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope. The lines wavered slightly, but the words were clear. I sat down on the edge of the dusty sofa, and I began to read. My dearest Claire, it began. If you are reading this, then it means two things. First, it means I am gone. Do not be sad for me. My life was long and full, and I am ready for whatever comes next. Second, it means that Fool Graves actually managed to find you. For that, I am grateful. A small smile touched my lips despite everything. I could almost hear her voice, a little sharp, a little dry, stubborn. I know you must have 1,000 questions. Why did I never contact you? Why did I leave you this broken-down old place? Why am I writing you a letter instead of having told you all this in person? The answers are long and complicated, like most things in life, but I will try to explain. Your mother, my beautiful wild Jessica, broke my heart. She ran away from this place from me when she was 17. She wanted the city, the lights, the noise. She wanted everything this quiet life was not. I begged her to stay. We fought. Horrible things were said, things I regret every day. She left, and for years I didn't hear from her. I was proud and hurt, and I let her go. It is the greatest regret of my life. By the time I swallowed my pride and went looking for her, it was too late. I found out she had passed away, and that she had a daughter, you. The state had already taken you, Claire. I tried to get you. I swear to you I tried. I filed papers. I went to court. I hired a lawyer I couldn't afford. But I was an old woman with no income living on a failing farm, and your mother had written a letter, a bitter, angry letter written in her final days. In it, she said she never wanted me to have anything to do with her child. They used that letter against me. They called me unfit. They said you were better off in their care. They closed the door in my face. It was the second greatest regret of my life. I had to stop reading. My eyes were burning, my throat tight. I looked up at the dusty room, at the pale light filtering through the dirty windows. All my life I'd believed I was completely alone, an orphan with no one, a file in a cabinet, a line item in a budget. But all that time there had been a woman, a grandmother fighting for me, trying to reach me. And she'd lost. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and kept reading. So I came back here to this land, and I made a promise. I couldn't give you a childhood. I couldn't be there to bandage your knees or read you bedtime stories or teach you how to bake bread. The world had taken that from both of us. But I could give you one thing, a place to stand, a piece of the earth that belonged to you. I bought this orchard with the last of my money after your grandfather died. It was my dream, a place of our own. When Jessica left, I let it go. I stopped caring. But after they took you, I started working it again. I poured every bit of my energy, my anger, my love into this soil. I wanted to build something for you, a legacy, a safe harbor for you to come to when you were finally free, a home. But life has a cruel sense of humor. The trees got sick. My body got old. The bills piled up. Medical expenses I couldn't avoid. Then the vultures came. Horizon Land Group. They want this valley. They want to tear down these trees and pave over this land and build their soulless boxes. They offered me money. Not enough to live on, but enough to die on. I told them to go to hell. I read that line again. I told them to go to hell. I could feel the iron in those words, the defiance. I know Graves is going to tell you to sell. He's a practical man. He doesn't understand. He'll tell you to take the money and run. And maybe that is the smart thing to do. Maybe that is what's best for you. $47,000 is a lot of money when you have nothing. It could be your start. I will not blame you if you take it. You owe me nothing. You owe this place nothing. But I want you to know what this place is. It is not a debt. It is not a ruin. It is a promise I tried to keep. It is the only thing I had to give you. Before you decide, I want you to really see it. Not with Graves' eyes, not with Horizon's eyes, with your own. Walk the land, breathe the air, feel the quiet. This place has a heart, Claire. It's just sleeping. Whatever you choose, know this. You were never forgotten. You were always loved. Your grandmother, Rose. I folded the letter. My fingers were trembling. The paper was soft, worn, like it had been folded and unfolded many times. Like Rose had read her own words over and over, trying to get them right. I looked around the room again. It was different now. It wasn't just a dusty, abandoned house. It was a testament, a shrine, the physical manifestation of a love I'd never known existed. The anger I'd felt was gone. In its place was something so profound it felt like it might break me open. Grief. Not for Rose exactly. Not yet. But for everything that had been lost. For the childhood that never was. For the grandmother and granddaughter who never got to know each other. I put my head in my hands and I cried. I cried for the baby taken from her mother's deathbed, for the little girl who waited by windows for someone who was never coming, for the teenager who learned to be hard because she had no one to be soft for, and I cried for the stubborn old woman who fought for me and lost, who poured her love into dirt because she had nowhere else to put it. I cried until I was empty. When I finally lifted my head, the light in the room had changed. The sun was setting. Long shadows stretched across the floor. The house was growing colder. I was exhausted, emotionally, physically. I had $58.60, a bottle of water and a bag of peanuts, and nowhere else to go. I found the stairs and went up. There were 2 bedrooms. One was clearly a guest room, a simple bed with a faded quilt, an empty dresser. The other was hers. Rose's bedroom. The bed was neatly made, a handmade quilt folded at the foot. On the nightstand was a pair of reading glasses and a book, its page marked with a ribbon. There was a photograph on the dresser in a simple wooden frame. I picked it up. It was a young woman with dark hair and bright, defiant eyes. Her arm was around an older woman with a kind, tired face. Both of them were smiling, really smiling, the kind of smile that reached the eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. My mother and my grandmother, Jessica and Rose. They looked happy. It must have been taken before the fight, before everything fell apart. I felt a pang of connection so sharp it was almost physical. This was my family. This was my blood. I was not just a file in a cabinet. I was the daughter of Jessica, the granddaughter of Rose. I belonged to these women. I belonged to this story. I lay down on the bed on top of the quilt, still in my jacket. The exhaustion was absolute. The choice was still there, waiting for me in the morning. Sell or stay. The easy money or the impossible dream. $47,000. The number whispered in my mind like a siren song. It promised warmth and food and safety. It promised an escape from this cold, silent house and its ghosts. All I had to do was make a phone call. I should have been thinking about that, running the numbers, making a plan. But as I drifted off to sleep in the deep, profound quiet of my grandmother's house, all I could think about was the line from her letter. "This place has a heart, Claire. It's just sleeping." What does it take to wake up a heart? I didn't know, but lying there in the dark, wrapped in the quilt that Rose had made, breathing air that still somehow held the faint memory of her presence, I thought I might want to find out. The last thing I remembered before sleep took me was the weight of the iron key in my jacket pocket, cold and heavy and real. A key to a door, a key to a choice, a key to a life I didn't understand yet but that somehow, impossibly, belonged to me. I woke to gray light filtering through dusty windows and the profound silence of a house that had been waiting. For a confused moment I didn't know where I was. The ceiling above me was unfamiliar, cracked plaster, water stains blooming in the corners like dark flowers. Then I remembered. Rose's bedroom, Rose's house, my house. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath. I was still wearing my jacket, still lying on top of the quilt. My body ached from sleeping on a mattress that had gone flat with age. My mouth tasted like dust. I sat up slowly. Through the window, I could see the orchard stretching away into the distance. Rows and rows of bare cherry trees, their branches black against the pale morning sky. They looked less dead in the daylight, less like a battlefield, more like soldiers standing at attention, waiting for orders that might never come. My stomach growled. The peanuts and water from yesterday were long gone. I was hungry in a way that went beyond simple appetite. It was the hunger of someone who'd missed too many meals and learned to ignore the signal until it became background noise. I needed a plan. The practical part of my brain, the part that had kept me alive for 18 years, took over. I had $58.60. The nearest town was 3 miles away. I had no transportation, no food, no heat, no running water. The smart thing to do was walk back to town, use some of my remaining money to buy a bus ticket back to Portland, call Graves, sign the papers, take the $47,000 and never look back. But I wasn't ready yet, not quite. I went downstairs. The living room looked different in the morning light, less ghostly. The dust motes drifted lazy in the pale sun coming through the windows. I found Rose's letter where I'd left it on the coffee table. I picked it up and read the last lines again. Walk the land, breathe the air, feel the quiet. This place has a heart, Claire, it's just sleeping. All right, Rose, I'll walk your land. I tucked the letter into my jacket pocket next to the iron key. Then I went outside. The morning was crisp and cold. The sky was a washed-out blue, the kind of pale that comes before the real color fills in. The air smelled different than the city. Clean, sharp, like water and earth and something green struggling underneath the winter brown. I walked down the porch steps, careful of the one that had groaned under my weight yesterday. The dirt lane stretched away toward the road, rutted and muddy from recent rain. But I turned the other direction, toward the orchard. The trees were planted in neat rows, I could see that now. Whoever had laid out this orchard had done it with precision. The spacing was exact. The rows ran parallel, stretching away until they blurred together in the distance. It must have been beautiful once. In spring, when the blossoms came. In summer, when the cherries hung heavy on the branches. Now it was a tangle of neglect. Weeds and wild grass grew thick between the trees. Dead branches littered the ground. Vines with thorns had woven themselves through the lower branches, choking out new growth. But the trees themselves, when I looked close, were not dead. The bark was thick and gnarled, the kind of tough that comes from decades of survival. I touched one. The bark was rough under my palm, cold, but solid, rooted deep. I walked through the rows, my feet crunching on dead grass and fallen twigs. The orchard was bigger than I'd realized. 50 acres is an abstract number when you're sitting in a lawyer's office. Out here, walking it, it felt vast, endless. I found a creek cutting through the back corner of the property. It was shallow, maybe a foot deep, running clear over smooth stones. The water made a sound like whispered conversation. I knelt beside it and dipped my fingers in. The cold was shocking, sharp enough to make my bones ache, but it was clean, real. I kept walking, found the barn at the edge of the property, maybe 200 yards from the house. It was huge. A cathedral of weathered wood, the red paint almost completely faded to gray. The doors were massive, hanging on hinges thick as my wrist. They groaned when I pulled them open, the sound echoing in the empty space inside. The barn smelled like hay and dust and old motor oil. A tractor sat in the center, rusted and wounded-looking. Its tires were flat. Weeds grew up through the floor around it. Tools hung on the walls, their outlines marked in dust where they'd hung for years. Rakes, shovels, a chainsaw with a broken chain, everything coated in the fine gray powder of abandonment. In the back corner I found a small room. Maybe it had been an office once. There was a desk, buried under papers, a filing cabinet with drawers hanging open, a wooden chair with one leg shorter than the others. I sat down in the chair. It rocked slightly under my weight. The desk was covered in a chaos of documents, invoices for things I didn't understand, receipts for equipment and fertilizer, pamphlets about pest control and soil health, an almanac from 3 years ago, its pages dog-eared and marked with notes in Rose's shaky handwriting. And on top of it all, another envelope. This one wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Mr. Arthur Graves, attorney at law, written in the same elegant script as the letter I'd found in the house. It was sealed but not stamped. It had never been mailed. My hands trembled as I picked it up. This was meant for Graves. It was privileged, private. I shouldn't open it. I told myself that for maybe 30 seconds. Then I broke the seal. Inside were 2 things. Another letter and a thick stack of documents held together with a binder clip. I read the letter first. Arthur, it began. If you are reading this, it is because my granddaughter has chosen not to sell. I hope she has. I hope she found the courage to stay. But I know the odds are against it. The lure of that money will be strong for a child who has had nothing. But if she has stayed, she is going to need your help, and she is going to need the truth. Horizon Land Group is not just a development company. They are predators. Their offer is not generous. It is insulting. They know exactly what this land is worth, and they are trying to steal it. Not just from me, but from every farmer in this valley. I felt my pulse quicken. I set the letter down and looked at the stack of documents, started flipping through them. Property deeds, tax assessments, sales records, all public information but compiled with the methodical precision of someone building a case. Rose had documented everything. There were 18 properties marked on a hand-drawn map, 18 farms that Horizon had purchased over the last 5 years. Next to each one, Rose had written 2 numbers, the purchase price and the actual tax-assessed value. The pattern was clear even to someone like me, who'd never taken an economics class. Horizon had paid $140,000 for a property assessed at $320,000, $160,000 for land worth $400,000, $150,000 for a farm valued at $380,000. They were systematically underpaying by 50 to 60%. I went back to the letter. Look at the prices they've paid, Rose had written. Look at the pattern. They are assembling a massive parcel for a luxury development, 900 acres. The projected value of that development is over $100 million. They offered me $225,000 for a key parcel, knowing it was mortgaged to the point of foreclosure. It's not business, Arthur, it's theft. My breath was coming faster now. I spread the documents out on the desk, found the map Rose had drawn. She'd circled all the properties Horizon had bought, marking them in red, and right in the center, circled in black, was a square labeled Brennan Orchard, 50 acres. My land. Without it, the map showed, Horizon's holdings were fractured, broken into 2 separate parcels with a 50-acre gap right down the middle. It would be like trying to build a bridge with no center support. Possible, maybe, but compromised. Less valuable. My 50 acres weren't just another piece of land. They were the keystone, the one parcel that made everything else work. And Horizon knew it. That's why they'd offered $225,000 for property that was underwater in debt. That's why Graves had called it generous. Because on paper, for a property worth maybe $150,000 at best, buried under $178,000 in debt, $225,000 looked like a gift. But if this land was the linchpin of a $100 million development, it wasn't worth $225,000. It was worth 10 times that, maybe more. They weren't offering me a way out. They were offering me pennies on the dollar for something they desperately needed. I finished reading Rose's letter. I was trying to organize the remaining landowners to fight them, but my time ran out. If Claire stays, she is walking into this fight. She cannot do it alone. She will need a lawyer, a real one, not just an executor. She will need you to be on her side. I know you are a practical man, Arthur, but I also know you are a decent one. Don't let them do this to her. Don't let them win. Rose. I sat back in the chair. It rocked under me, that one short leg making it tip and sway. My blood was roaring in my ears. Everything clicked into place. Graves' gentle pressure to sell, his dismissal of Rose's stubbornness. He wasn't malicious. He was just doing what lawyers do, solving problems, closing files, moving on. He didn't see the theft because he wasn't looking for it. But Rose had seen it, and now I saw it. The anger came back, but different this time. Not hot and sharp, cold and clear, focused. This wasn't just about a broken-down farm anymore. This was about justice. This was about my grandmother's last fight. And now it was my fight. But then the cold reality washed over me like ice water. Who was I to fight a massive corporation? I was an 18-year-old girl with $58.60 in my pocket. They had teams of lawyers, millions of dollars, professional predators who did this for a living. I had a dead woman's research and a lawyer who thought I should surrender. It was impossible, hopeless. I sank down onto the dusty floor, my back against the desk. The weight of it all was crushing. The choice was no longer just about me. It was about legacy, about community, about right and wrong, and I was not equipped for it. I was a scared kid in way over my head. This is the moment, isn't it? The one where you're standing at a crossroads and you just know, that what you choose next will define everything that comes after. I sat there for a long time. The barn was silent except for the creak of old wood settling and the distant sound of wind in the trees. The sun moved across the sky, throwing bars of light through the gaps in the walls. I thought about the $47,000. I could still take it. I could call Graves right now. Tell him I'd changed my mind. Walk away from this fight, from this land, from Rose's impossible dream. No one would blame me. It would be the sensible thing to do. But then I thought about her letter, "Don't let them win." I thought about the photo of her and my mother, their smiles, the life they'd had before it all fell apart. I thought about the 18 years I'd spent being pushed around by systems I couldn't control. The state, the group homes, the courts, always powerless, always a passenger in my own life. This was the first time I had ever been given a choice, a real choice. And the choice was this. I could take a payoff and let the powerful people win just like they always did, or I could stand my ground. I could be as stubborn as my grandmother. I could fight even if I lost, even if it cost me everything. I stood up. My legs were shaky, but my mind was clear. I knew what I had to do. My foot hit something solid under the desk, not the dirt floor. I knelt down and brushed away the dust and grime. It was a loose floorboard, of course it was. Rose was nothing if not thorough. I used the claw end of a hammer hanging on the wall to pry it up. And there, nestled in the dark space beneath, was a metal box. An old ammunition can, army green, heavy and cold. I lifted it out and set it on the desk. The latch was stiff with rust, but I managed to force it open. My breath caught in my throat. The box was full of cash. Stacks of 20s and 50s and hundreds, bundled with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than I'd ever seen in one place. I counted it with shaking hands. $10,400. Tucked in with the money was one last letter, one last message from beyond the grave. "Claire," it said, "this is your war chest. It's not much. It's everything I saved over the last few years, the money I was going to use to hire my own lawyer to fight them. It's yours now. Use it to survive while you decide. Use it to hire a better lawyer than Graves if you choose to fight. Use it to get a good start somewhere new if you choose to sell. It is your freedom in every sense of the word. But I hope you fight. I hope you see what I see. This land isn't just dirt and trees, my girl. It's a place to put down roots. It's a place to be free from systems and landlords and people who want to put you in a box. It's the only real thing in this world. Don't let them take it. Love, Rose." I held the letter against my chest. The cash sat on the desk like a dare. $10,400, plus the $47,000 from the sale. I could walk away from this with $57,400. I could go anywhere, do anything, start completely over. The easy road had just gotten a whole lot easier. Or, as Rose said, this was my war chest. Money to fight with, money to survive on while I figured out how to do the impossible. I stood there in the dying light of the barn, the weight of two women's lives in my hands. The mother who ran away, the grandmother who stayed, the legacy of flight and the legacy of fight. I had to choose which one was mine. I carefully packed the documents, the cash, and the final letter back into the ammunition can, carried it back to the house, my arms aching with the weight. I built up the fire in the living room fireplace using wood from the stack on the porch, sat at the kitchen table with the ammunition can in front of me. The house was no longer scary. The silence was no longer empty. It was watchful, waiting for my decision. I thought about my life, a series of temporary rooms, other people's rules. I had never had a home. I had never had a family. I had never had a purpose. This place, this broken, beautiful, stubborn place, was offering me all three. It wouldn't be easy. It would be the hardest thing I had ever done. But Rose believed I could do it. She had left me the tools, the knowledge, the means. She had left me her faith. I pulled out my phone. The cracked screen glowed in the firelight. I still had Graves' number. My thumb hovered over the call button. This was it, the point of no return. I pressed the button. It rang twice. Arthur Graves. His voice was as dry as I remembered, professional, tired. Mr. Graves, it's Claire Brennan. Miss Brennan, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Have you come to your senses? Are you ready to sign the papers? I took a deep breath. When I spoke, my voice was steady, clear. The sound of it surprised me. I didn't sound like a scared kid anymore. I've made my decision. I'm not selling. There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear him processing it, his neat mental boxes getting rearranged, the simple problem that had just refused to be solved. I'm sorry, he said like he'd misheard. You're what? I'm not selling the property to Horizon. I'm keeping it. Miss Brennan, Claire, be reasonable. The debt, the taxes, you have no money, no resources. The bank will foreclose in 90 days. You'll lose the property and walk away with nothing. Do you understand what nothing means? I understand perfectly. My eyes fell on the ammunition can sitting on the table. I have resources you're not aware of, and I have my grandmother's research on Horizon Land Group. I know what they're doing. I know what they've done to this valley, and I'm going to fight them. Another silence, longer this time, heavier. I could picture him in his office looking out at the city, my file open on his desk, the girl who was supposed to be grateful for the easy way out. You're making a terrible mistake, he said. His voice was flat now, all the practiced warmth gone. No, I said. A slow smile spread across my face even though he couldn't see it. For the first time in my life, I think I'm making a choice. My grandmother's letter said you were a decent man, Mr. Graves. She asked you to help me. So are you going to help me or are you going to work for them? It was a gamble, a huge one. I was calling his bluff, challenging his integrity based on a dead woman's hope and my own desperate need. He was silent for what felt like an eternity. I heard him let out a long, slow breath, the sound of a man wrestling with his conscience, the sound of a decision being made. The bank's foreclosure auction is in 90 days, he said finally. His tone had shifted, no longer condescending, professional, informative. To stop it, you'll need to pay the arrears on the loan and the back taxes. It comes to about $22,000. Can you do that? My heart soared. He didn't say no. He told me the next step. Yes, I said, I can do that. As for Horizon, he continued, a fight with them will be expensive and ugly. They will try to bury you in legal fees and intimidation. They have done this before. They are very good at it. I know. Then I will need a retainer to act as your counsel, and I will need to see this research your grandmother collected. I'll be in your office tomorrow morning. I'll bring everything. There was a pause, and then, for the first time, I heard something new in his voice. It might have been respect, or it might have been the faint echo of whatever he had felt for Rose all those years ago. Very well, Miss Brennan, I'll see you then. And Claire. Yes. Your grandmother was one of the most stubborn women I ever knew. I see it runs in the family. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking. I had done it. I had jumped. I didn't know if I had a parachute, but I was in the air. I looked around the kitchen, at the flickering firelight dancing on the old wooden cabinets, at the cracked linoleum and the ancient appliances, at the coffee cup still sitting in the drying rack. I wasn't a guest here anymore. I wasn't a visitor deciding whether to stay. I was home, and I was going to fight for it. The next morning I was a woman on a mission. I took the first bus back to Portland. The ride felt different this time. I wasn't running away. I was preparing for war. I walked into Graves' office carrying the ammunition can. The receptionist's eyes went wide, but she didn't say a word. I walked past her perfect hair and perfect smile and perfect judgment, and I opened his door without knocking. Graves looked up from his desk, surprised. I set the ammunition can down with a heavy thud. This is the research, I said, and this is your retainer. I took out $4,000 in cash and placed it on top of the can. He looked at the money, then at the box, then at me. He didn't ask where I got it. He just nodded. He spent the next 2 hours reading Rose's documents while I sat in the worn leather chair and waited. I watched his face as he read, watched the surprise, the anger, the slow dawning realization of what Horizon had been doing. When he finished, he looked at me over his glasses. Your grandmother was right. This is theft, systematic and deliberate. Can we prove it? In court, maybe, maybe not. But we can make enough noise that Horizon will have to respond. And if we can get the other families to join us, we might have a class action case. The other families who sold their land. Yes, if they're willing to fight. If they're willing to admit they were cheated and stand up to say so. Will they? He leaned back in his chair. It creaked under his weight. I don't know, people are proud and scared. Horizon is powerful, but your grandmother tried to organize them once. Maybe you can succeed where she couldn't. I spent the rest of the day in Portland. I went to the bank and paid $22,000 to stop the foreclosure, $18,000 in arrears, $4,000 in penalties and fees. The teller looked at me like I was crazy when I handed her stacks of cash held together with brittle rubber bands. I went to the county clerk's office and paid the back taxes, another $3,200. The clerk stamped the receipt with a loud thunk that echoed in the quiet office. When I was done, I had $4,200 left, enough to live on for a few months if I was careful, enough to buy time. The foreclosure was canceled. The threat of losing the land to the bank was gone. I had bought myself 90 days, 3 months to figure out how to make this work. I also went to the public library, spent hours in front of a computer, learning everything I could about cherry farming, about pruning and irrigation and soil health, about the diseases that could kill an orchard and the treatments that could save it. Most of it felt like a foreign language, but I printed out articles, made notes. I was no longer just a fighter. I was a student, and the subject I was studying was survival. When I got back to the orchard 2 days later, the sun was setting. The sky was turning orange and pink behind the mountains. I stood in the dirt lane with my backpack full of groceries and my head full of information I didn't quite understand yet, and I looked at the farmhouse. Something had shifted. The place didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a project, a purpose, a promise I was trying to keep. The work started the next morning. I woke up at dawn, my breath visible in the cold air of the bedroom. I made a fire, ate peanut butter straight from the jar. Then I went outside and started clearing the overgrowth around the house. I had bought a pair of shears and a small handsaw with some of my remaining money. My hands, soft from years of indoor life, were blistered and raw within hours even with work gloves. My back ached. My shoulders screamed. Every muscle in my body protested this sudden demand for labor it had never been asked to perform. But I kept going, cutting back the thorny vines that had grown up the porch, trimming the dead branches from the trees closest to the house, clearing a path from the door to the barn. Every night I collapsed into Rose's bed too exhausted to even dream. Every morning I woke up and went back out there. Slowly, inch by painful inch, I started to reclaim the land. On the afternoon of my 6th day, I heard the sound of an engine. I looked up from the vine I was cutting to see a pickup truck turning into the lane. Old, blue, rusted around the wheel wells. It stopped in front of the house and a man got out. He was older, maybe late 60s, with a face that looked like weathered leather, deep lines around his eyes, hands thick and calloused, the hands of someone who had worked his whole life. He stood there for a moment, looking at me, at the small patch of cleared ground around the house, at the vast wilderness of the orchard stretching behind me. "You must be Rose's girl," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "I'm Claire," I said. I was leaning on the shears, breathing hard, sweat on my forehead despite the February cold. "George Morrison," he said. "I live on the next farm over. Lived there 50 years. I saw the smoke from your chimney. Figured I'd come see who was here." We stood there in silence for a moment, him looking at the evidence of my work, me looking at him and wondering if he was friend or foe. "Your grandmother was a hell of a woman," he said finally. "She tried to get us all to stand up to that Horizon company. Some of us were too scared, too in debt. We sold." He looked down at his boots. When he looked back up, there was something in his eyes that might have been regret. "I always regretted it." "She didn't give up," I said quietly. "No," he smiled, but it was sad. "No, she did not." He looked at the shears in my hand, at the small handsaw leaning against the porch. "That's a big job for little tools," he said. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of an engine, louder than George's truck, deeper. I threw on my jacket and went outside to find him sitting on a tractor, a brush hog attachment on the back, the kind of machine that could clear brush and weeds in minutes instead of hours. "Figured you could use a hand," he said. He didn't wait for an answer. He put the tractor in gear and started driving up and down the rows. I stood there and watched. What would have taken me months he did in a day. 8 hours of methodical work. Driving between the rows, the brush hog shredding years of overgrowth, leaving clear ground in its wake. When he was done, the orchard was transformed. You could see the trees again, really see them, standing in their neat rows, their full gnarled forms visible for the first time, the bones of what this place had been, what it could be again. That night George came back with his wife. Her name was Rachel. She was small and round with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun. She carried a casserole dish wrapped in a towel. "Figured you could use a hot meal," she said. It was the first real home-cooked meal I'd had in a decade. Chicken and rice and vegetables that tasted like they'd come from a garden. I almost cried. We sat at my kitchen table, the three of us, and they told me stories about Rose, about her stubbornness, her kindness, her love for this land, about the way she'd tried to organize the valley against Horizon and how most people had been too scared to listen. "You're doing what she couldn't," Rachel said softly. "You're still here, still fighting." "I don't know if I can win," I said. George looked at me across the table. His eyes were steady. Winning isn't always about getting what you want. Sometimes it's just about not giving them what they want. Sometimes stubbornness is its own victory. That night after they left, I sat on the porch and looked out at the orchard, the cleared ground, the visible trees, the first tangible evidence that this place could be saved. I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally, maybe two. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd had yesterday. The legal battle was going to be slow. Graves had warned me. He was filing injunctions, challenging permits, using Rose's research to build a case. But these things took time, months, maybe years. In the meantime, I had to survive. I had to learn how to be a farmer. I had to figure out how to make this land produce something. Anything. I had $4,000 left, maybe enough for 3 months if I was careful. After that, I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to sell, not to Horizon, not to anyone. This land was mine. Rose had given it to me, and I was going to keep it or die trying. I went inside and added wood to the fire, sat in front of it and read through the farming articles I'd printed at the library, learning, planning, preparing for a spring that might bring blossoms or might bring nothing. Outside, the wind moved through the bare branches of the cherry trees. They creaked and swayed but held firm, rooted deep in soil that had held them for decades. I was rooted now too, not by birth, not by blood exactly, but by choice, by stubbornness, by a promise I'd made to a woman I'd never met. "This place has a heart," Rose had written. "It's just sleeping." I was going to wake it up, or I was going to go down trying. And either way, I wasn't going to be alone anymore. The learning curve was vertical. That's what George called it the morning he showed up with a battered pickup truck full of tools and a patience I didn't deserve. "You ever pruned a tree before?" he asked. I shook my head. I'd never even touched a tree before except to lean against one in a park. He smiled. It wasn't unkind. "Well, you're about to learn. Cherry trees are forgiving if you respect them, unforgiving if you don't." We started with the trees closest to the house. George showed me how to look for the dead wood, how to tell a branch that was dormant from one that was gone, how to cut at the right angle so water wouldn't pool in the wound, how to shape the tree so light could reach the inner branches. It was like surgery, precise, deliberate, every cut mattered. My hands were clumsy at first. The pruning shears felt awkward in my grip. I made cuts that were too straight or too angled or in the wrong place entirely. George would look at what I'd done, nod slowly, and show me how to do it better. He didn't criticize. He just taught, over and over until my hands started to remember. We worked from dawn until the light failed. 6 hours, 8 hours, 10. My arms ached so bad I could barely lift them to brush my teeth at night. My hands were covered in blisters that burst and bled and formed calluses. My back felt like it had been broken and poorly reassembled. But I could see the progress. Trees that had been wild tangles of dead and living wood started to take shape, started to look like something intentional, something cared for. "This is just the beginning," George said on the third day. We were standing in a row of trees we'd finished, looking at our work. Pruning is one thing, but you need water, fertilizer, pest control, and you need to learn the business side. "How did Rose do it?" I asked. "She barely did," he said quietly. "The last few years were hard. The trees got sick, some kind of blight she couldn't afford to treat properly. Medical bills ate up everything. That's when Horizon started circling. They could smell the blood in the water. His jaw tightened. We all could have helped more, should have helped more, but we had our own problems, our own debts. It's easy to look away when helping someone else might sink you too. You're helping me now. He looked at me. His eyes were the color of old denim, faded but strong. Yeah, I am, maybe trying to make up for not helping her. The second week, George's daughter showed up. Her name was Bate. She was maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of efficient energy that came from juggling too many responsibilities at once. She worked as an accountant in Portland but drove out on her lunch break because George had called her. She sat at my kitchen table with a laptop and a stack of forms and looked at me like I was a puzzle she needed to solve. "Dad says you're serious about this." "I am. You know the odds, right? Small farms fail all the time, especially ones that have been dormant for years, especially ones run by people with no experience." "I know." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, let's see what we're working with." She spent 2 hours going through everything with me. How to set up a farm business license, how to track expenses and income, how to file quarterly taxes, how to apply for agricultural grants and loans if I needed them. Her voice was patient but firm, like a teacher who cared whether you learned but wouldn't hold your hand forever. "You'll need insurance," she said. "Liability in case someone gets hurt on your property. Crop insurance in case of hail or frost. It's expensive but necessary." "How expensive?" "About $1,500 a year for basic coverage." I did the math in my head. I had maybe $3,000 left after paying off the debts. $1,500 for insurance. That left me with $1,500 for everything else. Food, gas, equipment repairs. It wasn't enough. Not even close. Bate must have seen something in my face. "Look," she said, her voice softer. "The first year is always the hardest. You're not trying to make a profit. You're trying to survive. Keep your expenses as low as possible. Grow what you can. Fix what you can with duct tape and prayer. And don't be too proud to ask for help." She pulled a business card from her wallet and slid it across the table. "That's my cell. You have questions about the business side, you call me. No charge. Consider it payment for all the times your grandmother helped my mom when she was sick." I looked at the card. Bate Morrison, CPA. I didn't know what to say. "Thank you seemed too small." She stood up. Her eyes were kind. "You're not alone in this, Claire. Remember that." After she left, I sat at the table and looked at the forms she'd helped me fill out. The business license application, the tax registration, the insurance quote. It all felt impossibly adult, impossibly real. 2 weeks ago, I'd been homeless with $73. Now I owned 50 acres and was trying to figure out quarterly estimated tax payments. The absurdity of it made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. March came in cold and wet. The rain turned the orchard into a muddy mess. I learned to wear boots everywhere. Learned that every piece of clothing I owned would eventually be stained with dirt and tree sap and things I couldn't identify. George taught me about the irrigation system. It was old. Half the pipes were cracked or clogged. We spent 3 days crawling through mud, replacing sections, clearing blockages, trying to resurrect something that had been left to die. "Water is everything," George said. We were lying on our backs under a tree, water dripping on our faces while we tried to fix a stubborn coupling. You can have the best trees in the valley, but without water, they're just expensive firewood. The system fought us every step of the way. 50-year-old pipes that had frozen and thawed too many times, fittings that had rusted solid, a pump that coughed and wheezed like it had emphysema. But we got it working. When we finally turned it on and water started flowing through the lines, spraying out over the trees in silver arcs, I felt something close to triumph. George stood next to me, both of us soaked and muddy, watching the water fall on trees that hadn't been watered in years. "That's a start," he said. Late March the letter came, official, typed on heavy cream-colored paper from Horizon Land Group. "Dear Ms. Brennan," it began, "we understand you have chosen not to accept our previous offer for the property located at 4750 River Road. We would like to meet with you to discuss a revised proposal that we believe will be mutually beneficial." The letter was signed by someone named Marcus Chen, Chief Executive Officer. I showed it to Graves over the phone. He was quiet for a long moment. "They're not going to give up," he said. "The fact that you stopped the foreclosure probably surprised them. They thought you'd fold." "Should I meet with them?" "That's your call, but if you do, don't go alone, and don't agree to anything, just listen." 2 days later, a black SUV pulled up the lane. Expensive, out of place on the muddy farm road like a diamond in a pig trough. 2 people got out. The man was maybe 50, tall, good-looking in a way that was probably expensive to maintain, tailored suit, perfect hair, smile that didn't reach his eyes, Marcus Chen. The woman was younger, late 30s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She introduced herself as Jennifer Wade, head of land acquisition. They picked their way carefully across the mud, trying not to ruin their shoes. I watched them from the porch, still wearing my work clothes. Boots caked with dirt, jeans torn at the knee. I hadn't showered in 2 days. "Ms. Brennan," Chen said, extending a hand. "Thank you for seeing us." His handshake was firm and brief, professional, the handshake of someone who shook a lot of hands and didn't think about any of them. "I didn't invite you," I said, "but you're here." His smile tightened. "Fair enough, may we come in?" I led them into the kitchen, didn't offer coffee or water, just stood there with my arms crossed while they took in the old appliances and cracked linoleum and general air of barely contained poverty. Wade pulled out a folder, set it on the table. Inside were papers, charts, a map. "We've revised our offer," she said. Her voice was smooth, practiced. $250,000 for the property as is. That's $25,000 more than our previous offer. I didn't touch the folder. Why? Chen stepped in. His voice was warm, reasonable, the voice of someone explaining something to a child. "Because we respect that you have an attachment to this place. We understand it was your grandmother's. We want to honor that by paving over it and building condos." His smile didn't waver. "By creating something that brings economic opportunity to this valley, jobs, tax revenue, growth, at the expense of the people who live here now." Wade's expression hardened slightly. "Ms. Brennan, with all respect, this farm is not viable. Your grandmother ran it into the ground. You have no experience, no capital, no realistic path to profitability. We're offering you a way out." "I'm not looking for a way out." Chen leaned forward slightly. "Let's be honest with each other. You're 18 years old. You just aged out of foster care. This place is drowning in debt and neglect. Winter is ending, spring is coming. Do you have any idea what it costs to run a cherry orchard, fertilizer, pest control, labor for harvest, equipment, insurance?" He let that sink in, then continued, his voice softer. "You won't make it through one season. The bank might have backed off for now, but they're watching. One missed payment and they'll be back. You'll lose everything and walk away with nothing." He slid the folder toward me. "250 is generous, take it. Start your life. Don't make your grandmother's mistakes." I looked at the folder, at the number written on the top sheet. $250,000, more money than Rose had ever seen, more money than I could imagine. For a moment, I felt the pull of it, the seduction of the easy way, the voice in my head that sounded like survival whispering, "Take it, take it, take it." Then I thought about Rose's letter, about the map showing how my 50 acres were the keystone of their $100 million project, about the 18 families they'd already cheated. I picked up the folder. Chen's smile widened. I handed it back to him unopened. "This land isn't for sale." The smile vanished. Wade's eyes went cold. Chen's mask slipped just enough for me to see what was underneath. Anger, frustration, the look of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. "You're making a mistake," he said. His voice was hard now. "No more warmth, no more reason. This valley is changing. You can change with it or you can be buried by it." Is that a threat? It's a reality. Farming is hard work, Ms. Brennan, dangerous work. Accidents happen, equipment fails, people get hurt. The way he said it made my skin crawl. It wasn't explicit, nothing I could take to the police, but the implication was clear. "I think you should leave," I said. Wade started to say something, but Chen put a hand on her arm. They stood up. Chen buttoned his jacket with deliberate calm. "The offer expires in 30 days, he said. "After that, we move forward with other options." He walked to the door, turned back. "One more thing. Small farms like this require permits, water rights, zoning compliance, environmental assessments. It would be unfortunate if there were any issues with your paperwork, any violations that needed to be addressed." Then they were gone. The SUV pulled away, spraying mud from its tires. I stood on the porch watching them leave. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. The kind of cold rage that came from being threatened by people in expensive suits who thought power was the same thing as right. I called Graves, told him what happened. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "They're going to come at you hard now. Legal harassment, nuisance complaints. They'll try to bury you in bureaucracy and expenses until you give up." Let them try. A week later it started. A county inspector showed up, said there had been a complaint about my fence line, that it might be encroaching on county right-of-way. He measured, took photos, said he'd file a report. 3 days after that, another inspector, this one about water usage. Someone had reported that I might be drawing more than my permitted allocation from the creek. He wanted to see my water rights documentation. I didn't have water rights documentation. I didn't even know I needed it. Graves filed emergency motions, requested extensions, fought back against every complaint, but each one cost money. Each one required time and paperwork and stress. The legal fees were adding up. $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Money I didn't have. Money Graves was fronting on the promise that I'd pay him back somehow. "You're bleeding me dry," I told him on the phone. "That's the strategy," he said. "Death by 1,000 cuts. They don't need to beat you in court. They just need to make it too expensive to fight." "Can we sue them for harassment?" "Possibly, but that takes time and money too, and proving intentional harassment is difficult. They're being careful. Everything they're doing is technically legal." I sat at the kitchen table after that call, staring at my dwindling stack of cash. I was down to $800, $800 between me and complete destitution. The smart thing would be to call Chen, take whatever offer was still on the table, walk away. But I couldn't, I wouldn't. Rose hadn't raised me, but she'd given me something more valuable than money. She'd given me stubbornness, the kind that ran in the blood even when you'd never shared a meal. George found me like that, sitting at the table, staring at nothing, He didn't ask what was wrong, he just sat down across from me. "Rachel's making dinner tonight," he said. "You're coming. No arguments." "I'm not hungry." "Don't care, you're coming anyway." Their house was small, warm. It smelled like pot roast and coffee and the kind of lived-in comfort that comes from 40 years in the same place. Rachel hugged me when I walked in, a real hug, the kind that said you belong here. We ate at a table that was too small for the three of us, elbows bumping, passing dishes. George told stories about farming in the 70s when everything was done by hand and a good year meant you broke even. Rachel talked about their kids, 3 of them, all grown and moved away, Bate in Portland, a son in Seattle, another daughter in California. They showed me pictures, graduations, weddings, grandkids I'd never meet. It was the most normal thing I'd experienced in years, maybe ever. A family dinner, people who cared about each other. The kind of thing I'd watched through windows as a kid and wondered what it felt like from the inside. After dinner, George and I sat on the porch while Rachel did dishes. The sun was setting, turning the sky orange and purple. The mountains were dark shapes against the light. "They're going to keep coming at you," George said. It wasn't a question. "I know." "You scared?" I thought about it. "Yeah, I'm terrified." "Good, fear means you're paying attention." He looked at me. "The question is whether you're too scared to keep fighting." "I don't know how to fight them. I'm one person, they're a corporation." "Rose tried to organize us," he said. "The farmers. She wanted us to stand together, file a class action lawsuit for fraudulent land acquisition, demand fair compensation for what they stole." "Why didn't you?" "Because we were scared and tired and we'd already sold. What's done was done." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "But it's not done. Not yet. You still have your land. And if you're willing to fight, maybe some of us are willing to fight with you." I looked at him, hope flickering in my chest like a candle in the wind. "You think people would join me?" "I think they regret what they did. I think they see in you what they saw in Rose. Someone who won't back down, someone worth following." "How do I organize them?" "Same way Rose did. You call a meeting, you show them the research. You ask them to stand with you. What if they say no?" "Then you fight alone." He smiled. "But you won't be alone. You'll have Rachel and me. You'll have Bate. You'll have Graves. That's more than Rose had at the end." 2 days later, I made phone calls. Used the list of names and numbers I'd found in Rose's papers. Families who'd sold to Horizon. People who might remember my grandmother. Some hung up on me, some said they weren't interested, but a few listened. A few said they'd come. George let us use his barn for the meeting. It was bigger than mine and had lights that worked. Rachel made coffee. Bate brought cookies. We set up folding chairs in a circle. 12 people showed up. 8 families, some I'd never met, others I recognized from town. They sat in the circle looking uncomfortable, suspicious, like they weren't sure why they were there. I stood in front of them with Rose's research spread out on a table. My hands were shaking. I'd never spoken to a group before, never tried to convince anyone of anything. "I'm Claire Brennan," I started. My voice came out quieter than I wanted. "Rose Brennan was my grandmother. She left me her orchard, and she left me this." I held up the research, the maps, the documents. For the next 20 minutes, I showed them what Rose had found. How Horizon had systematically underpaid for properties. How they'd targeted people in financial hardship. How they'd built a $100 million development on the backs of farmers they'd cheated. Some people shifted in their seats. Some looked angry. Some just looked tired. When I finished, there was silence. Then an old man in the back spoke up. His name was Roy. I'd met him once at the feed store. He'd called me a city kid playing farmer. "What are you asking us to do?" he said. "Join a class action lawsuit. Demand fair compensation for what they took from you. Stand together so they can't do this to anyone else." "What they took is gone," someone else said. "A woman named Linda. We signed the papers. It's too late." "Graves says it's not too late," I said. "He says if enough of us come forward, we have a case for fraud and coercion. We might not get our land back, but we can make them pay what it was really worth." "That'll take years," Roy said. "Cost money we don't have." "Graves is working on contingency," I said. "He only gets paid if we win." The room was quiet again, people looking at each other, weighing the risk against the anger, the fear against the regret. "Why should we trust you?" Linda asked. "No offense, but you're just a kid. You don't know anything about farming or business or fighting companies like Horizon." She was right. I didn't know any of those things, but I knew something else. "I know what it's like to have nothing," I said. "I know what it's like when the world tells you you don't matter, when powerful people make decisions about your life and you don't get a say." My voice was steady now, stronger. "My grandmother fought for me even though she never got to know me. She fought because she believed I deserved something, a place to stand, a chance. She left me that orchard knowing I might lose it, but she also left me this research, because she believed the truth matters, that fighting matters." I looked around the room, met their eyes one by one. "You all knew her. You know she wasn't a fool. She spent the last years of her life documenting what they did to you, to all of us. Maybe it's too late to get your land back, but it's not too late to make them admit they cheated you. It's not too late to stand up." The silence stretched. Then Roy stood up slowly. He walked over to the table, looked at the research. "Show me where to sign," he said. One by one, others came forward. Not all of them. 6 families total, 6 out of 18. It wasn't everyone, but it was enough. Graves said if we had 5, we had a case. We had 6. I called him that night from the farmhouse. Told him we had families willing to join the lawsuit. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your grandmother would be proud of you, Claire." It was the first time he'd said anything like that. The first time he'd acknowledged that this was about more than just property law. We filed the lawsuit a week later. Porter et al. Versus Horizon Land Group. Fraud. Coercion. Demanding independent appraisal of all properties purchased and compensation for the difference between what was paid and what they were worth. The local paper ran a story, small, on page 6, but it was something. People started talking. And Horizon started fighting back. The harassment escalated. More inspectors, more complaints. They found a surveyor who claimed my fence was 18 inches over the property line on the eastern boundary, demanded I move it or face a $15,000 fine. Graves fought it, brought in his own surveyor who said the fence was exactly where it should be, but the county had to investigate, had to hold hearings. Every hearing cost money in legal fees. My irrigation system was sabotaged one night. Lines cut, valves broken. I woke up to find water flooding the orchard, washing away topsoil, drowning the roots of young trees. George helped me fix it, but the damage was done. 3 trees died from root rot, 3 trees I couldn't afford to replace. I reported it to the sheriff. He took a report, said there was no evidence of who'd done it. These things happen on farms, animals, weather. Vandalism is hard to prove. I knew it was Horizon, or people working for them, but knowing and proving are different things. April came, the weather warmed, and something impossible happened. The cherry trees started to bloom. I woke up one morning to find the orchard transformed. Pink blossoms everywhere, thousands of them, millions, covering the branches like snow, like hope made visible. I walked through the rows in the early morning light, the air thick with the scent of flowers. Sweet, delicate, the smell of life insisting on itself despite everything. George came by and stood with me. His eyes were wet. "Haven't seen this orchard bloom in 5 years," he said. "Thought it was too far gone." The trees were tougher than anyone thought, dormant, not dead, waiting for someone to care enough to wake them up. We stood there for a long time, not talking, just looking at the beauty of it, the defiance of it. But beauty in farming is also vulnerability. Blossoms mean fruit, but only if nothing kills them first. Frost, hail, disease. 1,000 things could still go wrong. That night the temperature dropped. A late-season cold snap. The weather forecast said it might go below freezing, low enough to kill the blossoms, to destroy any chance of a harvest. George showed up at midnight with equipment I didn't have. Smudge pots, wind machines, things you run all night to keep the air moving, to keep the cold from settling. "It's going to cost you $800 in fuel," he said, "maybe more. But if you don't do it, you lose the crop." $800. I had 600 left. I was 200 short. "I'll front it," George said. "You pay me back from the harvest." "If there is a harvest." "There will be." He looked at the blossoms glowing pale in the moonlight. "These trees want to live. Let's help them." We worked through the night, running machines, burning oil in pots scattered through the orchard. The air smelled like diesel and wood smoke. The noise was constant, a low rumble that shook the ground. The temperature dropped to 26 degrees, just above the killing frost. The blossoms survived, barely. When the sun came up, George and I stood in the orchard, exhausted and filthy and broke, but alive. The trees were alive. "Worth it?" he asked. I looked at the acres of pink blossoms stretching away toward the mountains, at the beauty and fragility and stubborn hope of it all. "Yeah," I said, "worth it." But I was $800 in debt to George now, 600 in debt to Graves. I had $0 in my pocket, and spring had just begun. The fight was far from over. In some ways, it had only just started. The blossoms would become fruit. The fruit would need to be harvested, and every step between here and there was another chance for everything to fall apart. But standing there in the morning light, surrounded by pink petals and the smell of diesel and hope, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Certainty, not that I would win, but that I was fighting for something worth losing everything for. Rose had given me more than land. She'd given me a purpose, and purpose, I was learning, was worth more than money. It was worth everything. The blossoms lasted 2 weeks, pink and white petals drifting through the air like snow, catching in my hair, covering the ground in fragrant drifts. Then they fell. All at once it seemed. One day the trees were clouds of color. The next they were green with new leaves and tiny hard knots where the cherries would grow. If they grew, if nothing else went wrong, if the universe decided to show mercy for once. George walked the orchard with me, checking the fruit set. His fingers were gentle as he examined the developing cherries. Some trees had good coverage. Others were sparse. The trees that had died from the sabotage had been the strongest producers. Their loss would hurt at harvest. 60% set, he said finally. Could be worse, could be a lot better. Will it be enough? To pay your debts? No, to survive another year, maybe if we're lucky. Luck. I was learning that farming was 10% skill and 90% hoping the weather and the bugs and the market all decided to cooperate at the same time. It was like trying to juggle while riding a bike on a tightrope over a pit of fire. Possible, technically, but not something you'd bet your life on. Except I had. I'd bet everything on 50 acres of cherry trees that might or might not produce enough fruit to keep me from losing it all. May brought sun and steady warmth. The cherries grew from tiny green knots to marble-sized fruit, still hard, still green, but growing. I checked them obsessively, multiple times a day, looking for signs of disease or pest damage. Every brown spot sent me into a panic until George taught me the difference between normal sun scald and actual rot. "You're going to drive yourself crazy," he said one afternoon. We were sitting on the porch drinking water from mason jars, the kind of break that came after 6 hours of weeding in the hot sun. "I'm already crazy. I'm 18 years old trying to save a farm I didn't know existed 3 months ago." He smiled, fair point. Bates showed up every weekend. She'd made it her mission to teach me the business side whether I wanted to learn or not. We sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and went through spreadsheets that made my eyes cross. "You need to know your costs," she said. "Every dollar in and every dollar out. Otherwise you're flying blind." She'd built me a budget, a real one with categories and projections and formulas that calculated things automatically. It was both helpful and terrifying because it showed me in exact numbers how close to the edge I was living. Expenses so far, $26,000, insurance, legal fees, equipment repairs, fuel, fertilizer, the loan payment to stop foreclosure, money I'd borrowed from George and Graves. Income $0. Projected harvest value if everything went perfectly, $40,000, maybe. Projected profit after paying debts and expenses, maybe $10,000, if nothing else went wrong. "That's not enough to live on," I said. "No, but it's enough to survive one more year. Then you do it again, and again, until eventually you're not just surviving." "How long does that take?" "For a farm this size, 5 years, maybe 10. 10 years of this, of barely scraping by, of one disaster away from losing everything." The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something else. Determination. The kind that came from having nothing left to lose. The lawsuit moved forward slowly. Graves filed motions. Horizon's lawyers filed counter motions. There were depositions, document requests, the kind of legal trench warfare that could go on for years. But something was shifting. The local paper ran another story, bigger this time, on the front page. Farmers stand up to development giant. They interviewed Roy and Linda and 2 other families from the lawsuit, quoted Graves about fraudulent land acquisition practices. Horizon didn't like that. Their PR firm issued a statement, called the lawsuit frivolous, said they'd acquired all properties legally and fairly, accused us of trying to extort money from a legitimate business. The statement made my blood boil, but Graves just smiled when he read it. "Good," he said. "They're worried. If they weren't, they'd ignore us." June arrived hot and dry. The cherries turned from green to yellow to the first blush of red. They weren't ripe yet, still hard, but getting close. George said another 2 weeks, maybe 3. But 2 weeks was an eternity in farming. 2 weeks for hail to destroy the crop, for birds to eat it all, for prices to crash, for any one of 1,000 things to go wrong. The community started rallying in ways I hadn't expected. The owner of the feed store gave me credit, said I could pay after harvest. The mechanic in town fixed my truck for half price. Rachel organized a fundraiser dinner at the church. 40 people showed up. They raised $1,800. People I'd never met were donating money to help me survive. It was humbling and overwhelming, and I didn't know how to process the feeling of being cared for by strangers. "You're not a stranger anymore," Rachel said when I tried to thank her. "You're one of us. We take care of our own." But not everyone felt that way. There were people in town who thought I was causing trouble, stirring up old wounds, making things harder for everyone by fighting Horizon instead of just selling and moving on. I heard the whispers at the grocery store, saw the looks. One old woman told me to my face that Rose had been a stubborn fool and I was following in her footsteps. It stung, but I was learning that doing the right thing didn't make you popular, it just made you right. The vandalism continued. Small things. A gate left open so deer could get into the orchard. Fence wire cut in the middle of the night. My mailbox knocked over twice. The sheriff said there was nothing he could do without evidence, but I knew. And Horizon knew that I knew. It was a message. You're vulnerable. You're alone. Give up. I didn't give up. George helped me set up game cameras around the property. Motion activated. Night vision. If someone came back, we'd have proof. Mid-June, the cherries started to ripen. Really ripen. Turning deep red. Bing cherries. The kind that sold for premium prices when they were perfect. The kind that rotted or split if you waited too long to pick them. The harvest window was maybe 10 days. After that, the fruit would be too soft, worthless. George and I stood in the orchard looking at acres of ripening fruit and did the math. 50 acres. Average yield on trees that hadn't produced in years, maybe 300 pounds per acre. That was 15,000 pounds of cherries. Give or take. To pick that much fruit in 10 days, we needed workers. At least 20 people working full-time. 8 hours a day. Up and down ladders. Picking gently so the fruit didn't bruise. Keeping the stems on so they'd last longer. The going rate was $18 an hour. 20 workers for 10 days at 8 hours a day. That was almost $29,000 in labor costs. I had $0. George saw the panic in my face. We'll figure something out, he said, but his voice didn't sound confident. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in Rose's bed staring at the ceiling doing calculations that didn't add up. I could pay workers after I sold the cherries, but workers wanted to be paid daily, or weekly at most. Nobody was going to work on the promise of future payment. I could try to borrow money, but from who? I'd already borrowed from everyone who would lend to me. The bank wouldn't touch me. My credit didn't exist. I could try to harvest it myself, but that was insane. One person couldn't pick 15,000 pounds of cherries in 10 days. It was physically impossible. Unless. The idea came to me around 3 in the morning. Desperate, probably stupid, but maybe the only chance I had. The next morning I called Bate, asked her if she knew how to set up a social media campaign. What kind of campaign? The kind that asks for help. 2 days later, Bate launched a Facebook page and an Instagram account. Save Brennan Orchard. She posted photos of the farm, of the cherry trees heavy with fruit, of me standing in the orchard looking young and exhausted and determined. She wrote a story, not the whole story, just enough. 18-year-old orphan inherits grandmother's farm, fighting to save it from corporate development. Harvest starting next week. Need volunteers. She posted it everywhere. Community groups, farming forums, local news pages. She tagged people, shared it with friends who shared it with friends. I didn't think it would work. Why would strangers come help me pick cherries? But they did. The response was overwhelming. People from Hood River, from Portland, from towns I'd never heard of. College kids on summer break, retirees looking for purpose, church groups, high school students needing volunteer hours. Within 3 days, we had 47 people signed up. Bate created a schedule, divided them into shifts, morning crew and afternoon crew, coordinated everything in a shared spreadsheet that updated in real time. George shook his head in wonder. Your grandmother tried for years to get people to care about this valley. You did it in 3 days with the internet. It's not the same thing, I said. They're not fighting Horizon. They're just picking cherries. Sometimes that's how it starts, one small act at a time. The first volunteers showed up on a Monday morning. 23 people, most I'd never met. They parked along the road and walked up the lane carrying water bottles and wearing hats and looking uncertain. Bate organized them, showed them how to pick. Gentle twist, keep the stem, don't bruise, drop in the bucket carefully. When the bucket is full, pour into the bins. I walked through giving instructions, but mostly I just tried not to cry. These people had taken time out of their lives to help me, a stranger, because of a Facebook post, because Bate had made it sound like something worth doing. We worked for 8 hours. The sun was brutal. The work was harder than most of them expected, climbing ladders, reaching, bending. Your arms got tired fast. Your back started screaming after the first hour. But they kept going, talking, laughing, making a community out of labor. At lunch, people shared food. Someone had brought sandwiches, someone else cookies. It turned into an impromptu picnic under the trees. By the end of the day, we'd picked 2,000 pounds, more than I'd hoped, less than we needed, but progress. That night my whole body ached, but it was a good ache, the ache of work done with help, of not being alone. The volunteers came back the next day, and the next, some of the same people, some new. The numbers fluctuated, but we always had at least 15, some days 25. Word was spreading. The local news ran a story. Feel good piece about community coming together. They interviewed volunteers. One woman said she'd lost her own family farm 20 years ago. This felt like giving back. A teenager said he thought it was cool, like a protest but with fruit. The coverage brought more people, and it brought attention, which was both good and bad. On the fourth day, a black SUV pulled up. Marcus Chen got out. He stood at the edge of the orchard watching us work, didn't approach, just watched. His face was unreadable. After 10 minutes, he got back in the SUV and left. George saw him too. That's intimidation, he said, reminding you he's watching, that he can make this harder. Let him watch, I said. We're not doing anything wrong. That night, someone cut the power line to the cooler where we were storing the picked cherries. The refrigeration shut down. By morning, 1,200 pounds of fruit had started to go soft, unsellable. I stood in the barn looking at thousands of dollars of wasted work, and I wanted to scream, or cry, or burn something down. The rage was so hot it felt like it would consume me from the inside. George put a hand on my shoulder. We'll pick more, he said quietly. We'll make it up. But we can't keep losing fruit like this. I gestured at the ruined cherries. This is the 3rd time they've sabotaged us. The sheriff won't do anything. Graves can't stop it. They're going to bleed us until there's nothing left. Then we make sure there's something left. He squeezed my shoulder. Don't give them the satisfaction of quitting. I reported it to the sheriff again. He came out, took photos, said he'd file a report. We both knew nothing would come of it. But the volunteers heard about it, and instead of scaring them off, it made them angry. More people showed up the next day. 32. Someone brought a generator to keep the cooler running in case the power went out again. Someone else stayed overnight to guard the barn. We're not letting them win, a woman named Sarah told me. She was maybe 60, retired teacher from Portland. Your grandmother's story matters. This fight matters. We're staying until the harvest is done. The cherries kept ripening. We kept picking. 10 days turned into 12 as the weather stayed cool enough to extend the window slightly. Every morning I woke up terrified that frost or hail or fire or some new sabotage would destroy what we'd built. Every morning the trees were still standing, still heavy with fruit. We picked and picked and picked. My hands were stained red. My fingernails were broken. I had permanent ladder marks bruised into my shins. I was exhausted to the point of delirium. But we kept going. By day 14, we'd harvested 18,000 pounds, more than the projection. The volunteers had been efficient, careful. The fruit quality was good, better than good. George helped me load it into his truck. We drove to the packing house in town. The buyer there was a man named Tom. He'd bought cherries from Rose for years. He inspected the fruit, sorted through several buckets, checked for bruising and size and color. His face gave nothing away. Finally he nodded. "I can give you $2.40 a pound." My heart sank. I'd hoped for $3, maybe $3.50. $2.40 wasn't enough. But Tom wasn't finished. "That's for standard grade, but this is premium, larger fruit, good color, minimal damage." He looked at me. "I'll give you $3.20 for the lot." $3.20 times 18,000 pounds. That was $57,600 gross. I tried to do the math, but my brain was too tired. Tom saw my confusion and pulled out a calculator. 57.6 total. Minus packing fees, that's about $51,000 net to you. $51,000, more than I'd projected, enough to pay George back, pay Graves, pay the insurance, have something left over. "I'll take it," I said. My voice barely worked. Tom smiled. It was genuine. "First harvest is always the hardest. You did good, kid." Rose would have been proud. I signed the papers. He said he'd process payment within a week, cut me a check. I walked out of the packing house on legs that felt like rubber and sat in George's truck with my head against the window. "You okay?" George asked. "I'm broke and exhausted and I think I might pass out. But yeah, I'm okay." He laughed. "Welcome to farming." The volunteers kept coming even after the harvest was done. They helped clean up, repair equipment, prepare the orchard for next season. Some of them exchanged phone numbers, made plans to come back next year. Bait threw a harvest party, barbecue at George and Rachel's place. 50 people showed up, music, food, kids running around, the kind of celebration that felt earned. People kept thanking me for letting them be part of it, but I was the one who should be thanking them. They'd saved me. They'd saved the orchard. They'd proved that community still meant something. Roy pulled me aside during the party, handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $2,000. "What's this?" "Settlement advance," he said. "Horizon's lawyers reached out. They want to settle the lawsuit, avoid going to trial. They're offering everyone in the class action 25% above what they originally paid." "That's not enough," I said. "The research showed they underpaid by 60%. "No, it's not, but it's something, and sometimes something is better than fighting forever." "Are you taking it?" He looked at me. His old eyes were tired. I'm too old to fight anymore, Claire. I got what I could get, but you don't have to settle. You can keep pushing if you want." "What do you think I should do?" "I think you should do whatever lets you sleep at night." The settlement offer sat on my kitchen table for 3 days. I read it over and over. 25,000 for each family, times 6 families, 150,000 total. Horizon wouldn't admit wrongdoing, wouldn't face any real consequences. Just pay what amounted to pocket change for them and make the problem go away. But the families would get something, more than they had, and the lawsuit would end. The legal fees would stop. The stress would stop. I called Graves. "What do you think?" He was quiet for a long time. "I think Rose would tell you to keep fighting. But Rose isn't here. You are, and you have to live with the consequences." If I don't settle, does the lawsuit continue? Just you against them. The other families have all agreed to settle. You'd be alone. How long would it take? Years, maybe longer, and it would cost everything you have. I hung up and walked out to the orchard. The trees were bare now, the cherries all picked, just green leaves and the quiet sound of wind. I thought about what Roy said. Sometimes something is better than fighting forever. I thought about what I'd learned in the last 4 months. That stubbornness had value, but so did knowing when you'd won enough. I'd stopped the foreclosure, saved the farm, brought a community together, made Horizon sweat enough that they'd offered a settlement, proved that one person could stand up to power. Maybe that was enough. Maybe I didn't have to win everything to have won something. I signed the settlement papers. The check came 2 weeks later, $51,000 from the cherry sale, $2,000 from the settlement. I paid George $800, paid Graves $6,000 in legal fees, paid back the $1,800 from the church fundraiser, put aside $15,000 for next year's operating costs. That left me with $28,400, more money than I'd ever had, enough to survive, enough to breathe. It was late summer now. The orchard was quiet. The volunteers had gone back to their lives. George and Rachel were there when I needed them, but I was learning to manage on my own, learning the rhythm of the land, the cycle of seasons. I'd survived my first year, barely, by the skin of my teeth and the grace of strangers. But I'd survived. One evening I drove into town, went to the county clerk's office, filed paperwork to officially change my name. From Claire Brennan to Claire Porter Brennan, adding Rose's name, making it legal. The clerk stamped the forms, said it would be official in 30 days. I drove back to the farm and sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sky turned orange and purple and deep blue, the kind of beauty that made you believe in second chances. I'd come here with nothing, a cardboard box and $73. I'd been given a choice, easy money or impossible fight. I'd chosen the fight, and I'd won not everything but enough. Rose had left me more than land. She'd left me a legacy, a community, a purpose. She'd shown me what it meant to stand for something, to build something, to belong. I belonged now, to this land, to this valley, to these trees, to a future I was building one season at a time. The world had tried to tell me who I was, a file in a cabinet, a line item in a budget, a problem to be solved. Rose told me different. She told me I was worth fighting for, worth believing in. And now I believed it too. I was Claire Porter Brennan, 18 years old, owner of 50 acres of cherry trees in Hood River Valley, farmer, fighter, survivor. And this was just the beginning. Fall came to the valley in shades of gold and rust. The cherry trees turned color early, their leaves catching fire in the September sun. I walked through the orchard in the early mornings when the air was cool and the light slanted low through the branches, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. The settlement money had bought me breathing room. Not wealth, not security, just space. Space to think beyond the next crisis. Space to plan for a second season. Space to become what Rose had always believed I could be, a farmer, a steward of the land. But Horizon wasn't done. The settlement had closed the lawsuit, taken away the legal battle, but it hadn't solved the larger problem. They still wanted this valley, still had their eyes on 900 acres of orchards and farmland they could turn into resort condos and golf courses. My 50 acres were still the keystone, still the piece they needed to make their development work, and they still thought eventually I'd break, Eventually, I'd need money badly enough that I'd sell. They were wrong, but they didn't know that yet. The County Planning Commission scheduled a hearing for late September. Horizon was filing for a comprehensive rezoning of the entire Hood River Agricultural District. Not just my land, all of it, 870 acres. If the rezoning passed, agricultural use would no longer be the highest and best use. Mixed residential would be, and that would drive up property taxes so high that farmers who'd held land for generations would be forced to sell. It was a slow-motion land grab, legal, systematic, devastating. George brought me the notice. His face was grim. "They're going around us," he said. "We wouldn't sell individually, so they're changing the rules for everyone." Can they do that? They can try. The commission will hold a public hearing, take testimony, then vote. If it passes, most of the farmers left in this valley won't be able to afford to stay. When's the hearing? October 2nd, 3 weeks. We have to stop it. He looked at me. His eyes were tired. How? The same way we've done everything else. We organize, we fight, we show them this valley is worth protecting. The next 2 weeks were a blur of planning. Bate helped me coordinate. We reached out to every farmer still holding land, every family who'd settled with Horizon but still lived here, every business owner who depended on agricultural economy. We created a coalition, Hood River Valley Agricultural Alliance. It sounded official, professional, like we knew what we were doing. Mostly we were making it up as we went. George became the chairman. He had credibility, 50 years farming, everyone knew him, respected him. When he spoke, people listened. Rachel handled communications, phone trees, email lists, making sure everyone knew about the hearing, making sure they understood what was at stake. Bate managed the data. She compiled economic impact reports, tax revenue comparisons, employment numbers, everything we'd need to make the case that agriculture was better for the county than development. And I became the face of it, the story. 19-year-old fighting to save her grandmother's legacy. It was manipulative, using my age and my history, but it was also true, and truth, I was learning, was a weapon when you wielded it right. We held strategy meetings in George's barn, 20 people at first, then 30, then 50. Farmers who'd lost hope started finding it again. People who'd accepted that change was inevitable started believing maybe it wasn't. The local paper ran stories, this time not just human interest, real journalism, investigating Horizon's business practices, their history of rezoning fights in other valleys, the pattern of promises made and never kept. One reporter found records from Horizon's development in Central Oregon. They'd promised 300 jobs, delivered 80, mostly minimum wage service work. They'd promised tax revenue increases. Property taxes went up, but sales tax revenue stayed flat. The county was worse off than before. The stories mattered. Public opinion was shifting. Letters to the editor ran 3-1 against the rezoning. The comment section on the newspaper's website was brutal. People were angry. But Horizon had money. They hired a PR firm, started running ads, slick 30-second spots on local TV and radio, talking about economic opportunity, jobs for young people, tax base expansion, a brighter future for Hood River County. The ads were effective. Opinion started shifting back. Some people began questioning whether we were standing in the way of progress, whether we were selfish for wanting to keep things the way they'd always been. I was at the grocery store when I overheard 2 women talking. One of them said she thought the development would be good, bring in tourist dollars, make the town less provincial. The other agreed, said farmers were holding the county back, said maybe it was time for change. I stood there in the produce section holding a bag of apples and felt the weight of it. We weren't just fighting Horizon. We were fighting the idea that new was always better than old. That money mattered more than tradition. That progress meant paving over the past. A week before the hearing, Marcus Chen requested a meeting. He called Graves directly, said he wanted to talk, see if we could find common ground. Graves thought it was a trap. I agreed, but I also thought we should hear what he had to say. We met at a coffee shop in town, neutral ground. Chen arrived exactly on time, alone, no lawyers, no Jennifer Wade, just him in an expensive suit sitting across from me and Graves in a booth by the window. He ordered coffee, made small talk about the weather, the fall colors, then got to business. "I'm going to be direct with you, Claire. May I call you Claire?" I didn't answer. He took that as permission. "The rezoning is going to pass. We've done the math. We have 4 commissioners locked in. We only need 3 to win. It's over." "Then why are you here?" "Because I don't want to see you lose everything you've worked for. When the rezoning passes, your property taxes will quadruple, maybe more. You won't be able to afford to keep the land. You'll be forced to sell anyway." He slid a folder across the table. Inside was an offer, $300,000 for my 50 acres, contingent on the rezoning passing. "That's more than generous," he said, "given that you'll have no choice but to sell in a year or 2 anyway." Graves started to respond, but I put a hand on his arm, looked Chen in the eyes. "You think you've already won?" "I know I have. The only question is whether you walk away with dignity and money in your pocket, or whether you lose it all fighting a battle that's already over." I picked up the folder, looked at the number, 300,000. It would change my life, set me up for years, let me start over somewhere else. I handed it back. Chen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Frustration, anger, the look of a man who wasn't used to being told no. "You're a fool," he said quietly. "Maybe, but I'm a fool who still owns her land. We'll see how long that lasts." He stood up, left cash on the table for the coffee neither of us had touched, walked out without another word. Graves looked at me. "You know he's probably right, about the rezoning, about the taxes." "I know. So what's the plan?" "We make them work for it. We fight until the last vote is cast, and then we figure out how to survive whatever comes next." The hearing was scheduled for 7 p.m. on October 2nd. County Courthouse, main chamber, public comment period before the vote. We organized carpools, made signs, prepared testimony. Bate created a sign-up sheet for speakers. We had 47 people ready to testify. Each person got 3 minutes. The courthouse chamber held maybe 200 people. By 6:30, it was standing room only. Farmers in work clothes who'd come straight from the fields. Business owners in jeans and polo shirts. Retirees who remembered when the whole valley was orchards. Young families worried about being priced out of their own community. And there were Horizon supporters too. Real estate agents. Construction workers who needed jobs. People who owned property and wanted to see values increase. People who genuinely believed development was the answer. The commissioners sat at a raised platform at the front, 5 of them. I knew their names, knew how Graves thought they'd vote. Sarah Vance was the swing vote, the one who could go either way. She was in her early 60s, a former teacher, elected 2 years ago on a platform of balanced growth. She'd been quiet through most of the rezoning debate, hadn't tipped her hand either way. The chairman called the meeting to order, explained the process. Horizon's representatives would present first, then public comment, then the commission would deliberate and vote. Horizon's presentation was slick. PowerPoint slides, economic projections, artist renderings of what the development would look like. It was called Orchard Heights. 900 homes, a clubhouse, walking trails. It looked beautiful in the drawings. Clean, green, perfect. Their economist presented numbers. Construction jobs, permanent service jobs, projected tax revenue, 20 million in economic impact over 5 years. It sounded good, really good. I watched commissioners nodding, taking notes. Then public comment began. George spoke first. He talked about farming in the valley for 50 years, raising kids here, burying his wife in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the orchard she loved. He talked about what gets lost when you pave over farmland. It's not just dirt, he said. It's heritage. It's identity. It's the thing that makes a place home instead of just another suburb. Rachel spoke about community, about knowing your neighbors, about the Friday night dinners at the Grange Hall and the 4th of July parade that rolled past cherry trees instead of condos. Roy spoke about being cheated, about selling his land to Horizon for half what it was worth and regretting it every day, about how this rezoning was just another way to steal from people who worked the land. Bate presented economic data, showed that agricultural jobs paid better than service jobs, that family farms supported more local businesses than developments did, that Horizon's projections were based on optimistic assumptions that never panned out in practice. Person after person stood up and spoke, some eloquently, some haltingly, but all from the heart, all saying the same thing: this valley is worth protecting. The opposition spoke too. A real estate agent talked about young people leaving because there were no opportunities. A construction foreman talked about needing work. A woman who ran a bed and breakfast talked about wanting more tourists. Both sides had valid points. This wasn't simple, it never was. Then it was my turn. I walked to the microphone on shaking legs. The room went quiet. 200 people watching, waiting to hear what the girl who'd become the face of the resistance would say. I didn't have notes, didn't have a prepared speech. I just had the truth. My name is Claire Porter Brennan, I started. 7 months ago I was homeless. I just aged out of foster care. I had $73 and a cardboard box. I had no family, no future, no reason to believe anything would ever be different. I paused. The room was utterly silent. Then I got a phone call. A lawyer told me I'd inherited 50 acres from a grandmother I never knew, Rose Porter. She died trying to save this valley from exactly what's being proposed tonight. I could hear my voice echoing off the walls, strong, clear. I could have sold that land, taken the money and walked away. Nobody would have blamed me. I had nothing. $50,000 would have been a fortune. But Rose left me more than land. She left me a choice. She left me a legacy. She left me the chance to be part of something bigger than myself. I looked at the commissioners, at Sarah Vance. This rezoning isn't about progress. It's about money. Horizon's money. They want to turn 900 acres of working farmland into houses that local people can't afford. They want to destroy what makes this valley special so they can build something generic and profitable. I shook my head. I'm not an expert on zoning law or economics. I'm just someone who got lucky enough to be given a second chance. But I know this. When you pave over farmland, it's gone forever. You can't undo it. You can't bring it back. My voice got quieter, harder. I spent my whole childhood in places that were temporary, rooms I couldn't keep, homes that weren't mine. I learned that nothing lasts, nothing matters, you're just passing through. But this valley taught me different, taught me that some things do last. That land is permanent if you protect it. That community matters. That fighting for what's right is worth more than taking what's easy. I looked at Sarah Vance directly. You have a choice tonight. You can vote for money and development and change that can never be reversed, or you can vote to protect what makes this place home for the people who actually live here. The farmers, the families, the people who have been here for generations and want to stay for generations more. I stepped back from the microphone. 7 months ago, I was nobody. Now I'm a farmer, I'm part of this valley, and I'm asking you to protect it, for Rose, for George and Rachel, for every person in this room who chose community over profit. Please vote no. I walked back to my seat. The room erupted in applause, not everyone, but enough. The sound filled the chamber like thunder. The commissioners deliberated for 45 minutes. They asked questions of Horizon's team, asked questions of county staff, debated amongst themselves. Finally, the chairman called for a vote. Commissioner Davis, how do you vote? I vote yes to approve the rezoning. 1 yes. Commissioner Lopez, how do you vote? I vote no. 1 yes, 1 no. Commissioner Franklin, how do you vote? I vote yes. 2 yes, 1 no. We needed 3 no's to block it. Commissioner Reed, how do you vote? I vote no. 2 yes, 2 no. It came down to Sarah Vance, exactly as predicted. The chairman looked at her. Commissioner Vance, how do you vote? She was quiet for a long moment. The whole room held its breath, 200 people waiting. She looked at her notes, looked at Horizon's team, looked at the crowd, finally looked at me. I've listened carefully tonight, she said, to both sides. This is not an easy decision. There are valid arguments for economic development, for creating opportunities, for moving forward. My heart was sinking. This sounded like a yes. But she continued. There are also valid arguments for preserving what we have, for protecting agricultural land, for maintaining the character of our community. She paused. When I moved to this valley 20 years ago, I fell in love with it because of the orchards, because of the connection to the land, because it felt real in a way that so many places don't anymore. Another pause. I'm troubled by Horizon's history in other communities, by the gap between their promises and their results. I'm troubled by the economic analysis that suggests we'll actually lose more than we gain. She looked at the chairman. But mostly I'm troubled by the permanence of this decision. If we approve this rezoning, we can never undo it. The farmland will be gone. The character of this valley will be changed forever. She took a breath. I vote no. The room exploded. Cheers, tears, people hugging strangers. George grabbed me in a bear hug that lifted me off my feet. Rachel was crying. Bate was shouting. The rezoning was defeated, 3-2. Horizon had lost. It took 20 minutes for the room to calm down enough for the chairman to adjourn the meeting. By then Horizon's team had already left. Chen was gone. Their lawyer was gone. They'd packed up and walked out the moment the vote was called. Outside the courthouse, people were celebrating. Someone had brought champagne. Plastic cups were being passed around. Farmers who hadn't smiled in years were grinning like kids. George found me in the crowd. We did it, he said. Your grandmother would be so proud. We didn't do it, everyone did it, all of us together. He shook his head. No, you started it. You showed us it was possible to fight back. The rest of us just followed your lead. Sarah Vance came out of the courthouse. The crowd parted for her. She walked straight to me. That was a brave speech, she said. Thank you for listening. She smiled. It was tired but genuine. Someone had to stand up to them. I'm glad it was you. She walked to her car and drove away. The woman who'd saved the valley with a single vote. The swing vote who'd swung the right way. The celebration went on for hours. People drifted home eventually, back to farms and families and lives that would continue now because the land was protected. But a core group of us stayed. George and Rachel and Bate and Roy and Linda and a dozen others. We sat on the courthouse steps as the night got cold and talked about what came next. The rezoning was blocked, but Horizon still existed. They still had the properties they'd bought. They could try again in a year, or 2, or 5. "This isn't over," George said. "It's just one battle." "Then we'll fight the next one," I said, "and the one after that, for as long as it takes." "We will," Roy said. His old eyes were bright together. I drove back to the farm alone. The orchard was dark. The trees were shapes against the stars. I parked and sat on the hood of my truck looking up at the sky. The Milky Way was visible out here, a river of light across the darkness. I'd never seen it from the city, never known it was there. One more thing I'd discovered in this place that had become home. I thought about the last 7 months, everything I'd learned, everything I'd survived, everything I'd become. I'd turned 19 in the middle of harvest. My birthday had passed without fanfare while I was picking cherries with volunteers. I'd worked 12 hours that day and hadn't even thought about it being the anniversary of my birth. But sitting there under the stars, I thought about it, thought about the girl I'd been a year ago. Scared, alone, convinced she didn't matter. And I thought about who I was now, a farmer, a fighter, a member of a community that cared whether I lived or died, a granddaughter honoring a legacy she'd never known she had. Rose had saved me, not with money, not with some dramatic rescue, but by giving me a choice, by believing I was worth investing in, by leaving me something to fight for. And I'd honored that gift by fighting, by refusing to quit even when quitting made sense, by building something from nothing. The orchard would bloom again next spring, the cherries would grow, there would be another harvest, and another, year after year, season after season, the cycle continuing because I'd chosen to protect it. I slid off the truck hood and walked into the orchard. The ground was soft under my boots. The air smelled like earth and leaves and the promise of rain. I found Rose's favorite tree. George had shown it to me, an old Bing cherry in the center of the property. She'd planted it herself 40 years ago. It was massive now, thick trunk, spreading branches, the kind of tree that had seen generations. I put my hand on the bark, felt the rough texture, the solid strength of it. "I never got to meet you," I said to the tree, to Rose, to the memory of a woman who'd loved me from a distance. "But I know you now. I know what you fought for. I know what mattered to you." The wind moved through the branches, a sound like breathing. "I won't let them take it," I said. "I won't let them destroy what you built. I promise." It was a promise I knew I'd spend the rest of my life keeping. There would be more fights, more threats, more moments when selling would be easier than staying. But I wouldn't sell. I couldn't. Because this land wasn't just mine. It was Rose's. It was my mother Jessica's, even though she'd run from it. It was the legacy of everyone who'd worked this soil before me and everyone who would work it after. I was just the current steward, the one holding it for a while, making sure it survived to the next generation, and the one after that. I walked back to the farmhouse. The porch light was on. I'd left it burning, a beacon in the dark, a sign that someone was home. Inside, I built a fire, made tea, sat at the kitchen table with Rose's letters spread out in front of me. I'd read them so many times I had them memorized, but I read them again anyway. "This place has a heart, Claire. It's just sleeping." I smiled. The heart wasn't sleeping anymore. It was awake, beating strong, sustained by community and stubbornness and the kind of love that transcended death. You were never forgotten. You were always loved. I finally understood that now. Really understood it. Not just in my head, but in my bones. In the calluses on my hands and the ache in my back and the dirt under my fingernails. I'd been loved all along. By a woman I never met. By a community I never knew existed. By a piece of land that had been waiting for me to come home. And I'd love them back. By fighting, by staying, by refusing to let go. The fire crackled. The old house settled around me with the sounds of wood and wind and time. Outside, the orchard stood guard. 50 acres of cherry trees holding their ground against a world that wanted to pave them over. But they were still there, still standing, still mine. And that was worth more than any amount of money Horizon could ever offer. I was home finally, truly, permanently. I was Claire Porter Brennan, 19 years old, farmer, fighter, granddaughter, protector of the last honest acre. And this was just the beginning of the story I would spend my life writing, one season at a time, one harvest at a time, one choice at a time. The choice to stay, the choice to fight, the choice to build something that would last. The choice to be worthy of the legacy I'd been given. Outside, the wind moved through the cherry trees, a sound like applause, like blessing, like Rose herself saying, "Well done." I closed my eyes and listened. And I knew, deep in the part of me that had finally learned to believe, that everything was going to be all right. Not easy, never easy. But worth it, always worth it. This land had saved me, and now I would save it. For as long as I lived, for as long as I had strength. Forever,